Is this some kind of joke? The voice was sharp, youthful, and brimming with that misplaced bravado only a freshly pressed uniform can give. Corporal Davis, 21 years and 6 months old, a proud United States Marine, stood with his hands planted on his hips, staring down at the elderly man seated on a plain folding chair. The olive-drab canvas of the general-purpose tent dulled the outside noise of the base's annual open house, turning the space into a quiet, tense stage for what was unfolding. Harold Winters, 89 years old, didn't flinch. His weathered hands, etched with the lines of a lifetime, rested calmly on his knees. He wore simple khaki slacks and a faded blue polo, a humble contrast to the Marine's immaculate desert camouflage. "Is this some kind of joke?" The voice was young and sharp, the kind of confidence that comes from a freshly pressed uniform. Corporal Davis, 21 years and 6 months, a United States Marine, planted his hands on his hips and glowered down at the old man in the folding chair. The tense olive-drab canvas muffled the bustle of the base's open house, turning their little scene into something private and tense. Harold Winters, 89, sat motionless, his weathered hands folded on his knees like a map of a long life. He wore plain khakis and a faded blue polo, an unassuming contrast to the pristine desert camo of the young Marine. Davis was clearly provoked by Harold's calm. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old man," he snapped, voice rising. Two of his buddies snickered behind him, adopting the same swaggering posture. "This area's for active duty personnel and their families. You lost? Headed to the bingo tent?" A cluster of onlookers near the historical displays fell quiet and turned. A mother drew her child in closer. The tent air thickened with a low, uncomfortable tension. Davis, sensing an audience, swelled with misplaced authority. He fancied himself protector of the base's image. Harold, to him, was an unwanted relic. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Davis said, puffing his chest out. "Base regs. We can't have just anyone wandering through." Slowly, Harold turned his head and met the corporal's gaze. His eyes were pale and clear, not angry or frightened, but unnervingly still, the calm at a storm's center. He fumbled into a worn leather wallet, fingers slowed by age, and dug through plastic sleeves until he found his ID. Davis sighed impatiently. "Come on, Grandpa. We don't have all day. What, you 100? Just pull out your driver's license so I can call you a cab." The insult hung in the air. The crowd's murmur shifted toward disapproval. Harold produced a state-issued card and handed it over. Davis snatched it, scanned it dismissively. "Harold Winters, Northwood resident, that doesn't give—" "You clearance to be in here," he said, holding the ID like something dirty. Then his eye caught something else on Harold's polo, a small, tarnished pin at the collar. It was dull and battered, nothing like official insignia. A flea market trinket, Davis assumed. "What's that supposed to be?" he mocked, jabbing a finger at the pin. "Perfect attendance at the senior center? A prize for finishing your oatmeal?" His friends brayed with laughter that echoed beneath the canvas. The humiliation was palpable. The crowd hesitated between intervening and staying silent in the face of a uniform. For the first time, a flicker passed over Harold's placid face. Not anger, but something deeper. A memory coaxed awake by the slighting of that tiny object. The world vanished for him in a flash of white. The humid tent air was replaced by a cold so biting it felt like swallowing glass. He was 20 again, knuckles raw in frozen gloves, the sky an iron sheet over snow-swept hills in Korea. Artillery thudded distantly, a wind whistled through his thin fatigues. He knelt beside his platoon leader, Captain Richards, who lay gasping, torn by shrapnel. The captain's breath was a ragged rasp. With trembling fingers, Richards loosened a makeshift pin, a scrap of radio antenna fashioned into a keepsake, and pressed it into Harold's hand. "You held the line, Winters. You held the damn line by yourself," the captain rasped. "Don't ever forget what we did here." To anyone else, the pin was worthless. To Harold, it was sacred. "Sir, are you okay?" A voice pulled him back to the present. Harold blinked. The memory receded. Standing at the edge of the display area was a man in his late 30s, uniformed and serious, a gunnery sergeant, his name tag reading Reyes. He had watched the exchange with growing concern. Davis, annoyed by the interruption, barked, "I've got this, Gunny. This man is trespassing." Reyes ignored the protest and stepped forward. "Sir, my name is Gunnery Sergeant Reyes. Is this Corporal giving you a hard time?" Before Harold could answer, Davis cut in. "With all due respect, Gunny, I'm handling this. I'm making sure base security stays intact. This guy's got no business here." Reyes's eyes narrowed. He was a seasoned Marine, combat-hardened, the kind who'd forgotten more about the Corps than Davis would ever learn. He saw the difference between a pose and true bearing, and Harold's quiet dignity told him everything he needed to know. He sensed Davis was dangerously out of his depth. "Corporal," Reyes said low and dangerous, "stand down and step away." "Gunny," Davis began, insolence turning to insubordination. Reyes let him sputter, then gave the corporal a look that promised consequences later and stepped back, pulling his phone. He spoke under his breath into the line. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Reyes at Fleet Week Historical Exhibit GP-104. I have a situation. A corporal is harassing an elderly civilian. It's escalating. His name is on the ID. Harold Winters. That's Winters, Harold." Reyes's call set larger gears in motion. At the base command center, Master Sergeant Frank Miller, a steady, methodical man, took the report, made neat notes, and prepared to dispatch a patrol. He asked Reyes to spell the name and keyed it into the National Military Personnel Database, expecting a routine file. The result on his screen made him stare, then stand so fast his chair skidded back and clattered into a filing cabinet. "Sir," he croaked, pointing at the monitor, voice strained. Captain Evans, the officer of the deck, came over and peered. The stunned look on his face turned to pale horror. Under Harold Winters' name lay a service record that read like legend, a string of commendations and honors most couldn't imagine. At the very top, beside a black and white portrait, was one stark designation: Medal of Honor. Evans grabbed the phone and barked into it with urgent authority. "Gunny Reyes, this is Captain Evans at command. Do not let Mr. Winters leave under any circumstances. Ensure his safety and comfort. Understood? The base commandant and the general are en route." Back in the GP tent, Corporal Davis was still clinging to his moment of power, convinced of his righteousness. He had no idea that a machine far larger than his arrogance had already begun to turn, and that help was on the way. He saw it all as validation, proof that he was in control. He was the authority here. "All right, that's it, old man," Davis barked, his tone sharp with self-importance. He gestured toward Harold like he was pointing out a piece of evidence. "You're a security risk. You're being evasive. You're disturbing the public, and frankly—" He leaned forward, his voice dipping into mock concern. "I think you're confused. For your own safety, I'm detaining you until the MPs arrive. They'll get you the help you need. Maybe a nice, quiet room for an evaluation." It was his final move, the ultimate power play. He was going to have this frail old man escorted off and forgotten. But as Davis reached out, his fingers just inches from Harold's thin arm, the moment was shattered by a sound from outside, distant at first, then rapidly growing louder. The faint whine became a piercing wail, the unmistakable sound of a full military police convoy. Not a single patrol car. A convoy. Tires screeched to a halt just beyond the tent. Doors slammed in unison, followed by the synchronized crunch of heavy boots on gravel. The chatter inside the tent fell silent as everyone turned toward the entrance. Corporal Davis froze, his hands suspended mid-air, confusion washing over his face. He had called the MPs, yes, but not for this. This was overkill. The tent flap burst open. Two uniformed MPs stepped inside, hands near their holstered sidearms. They didn't even glance at Davis. Their eyes swept the tent, then they moved to either side of the entrance and stood at rigid parade rest. A figure followed them in, and the entire crowd gasped. It was Major General Marcus Thorne, the base commandant himself, a two-star general whose face was more often seen on walls and podiums than in person. His uniform was immaculate, his chest adorned with a fortress of ribbons. His expression was carved from cold, controlled fury. He walked with quiet authority that made Davis's earlier swagger look like a child playing soldier. His eyes, hard and gray as granite, swept the room, pausing briefly on the stunned crowd, flashing with disdain as they landed on Davis and his friends, and finally softening when they found Harold Winters. Harold had begun to rise, slowly, his movements marked by age but filled with quiet dignity. Without hesitation, General Thorne strode forward. His polished boots made no sound on the dusty floor as the crowd instinctively parted before him. He stopped exactly 3 feet from Harold. Then, in absolute silence, the general straightened. His body went rigid, and with crisp precision, he raised his right hand to his brow in the sharpest salute of his 30-year career. The gesture hit the room like a shockwave. Every witness felt it, a surge of respect that needed no words. "Sergeant Major Winters," the general's voice boomed, deep and resonant. "It is an absolute honor to have you on my base." "Sir." The title hung heavy in the air. Sergeant Major Corporal Davis's jaw dropped. His pale face turned ghostly white. The tent had gone so still you could hear the low hum of a generator outside. General Thorne held his salute for a long moment before turning to the audience. His voice took on the weight of history itself. "For those of you who don't know," he said, "you are in the presence of a true American hero. Sergeant Major Harold Winters served in the 1st Marine Division. He fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam." He paused, letting the words settle. "At the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950, the general continued, then Staff Sergeant Winters found his platoon pinned down. Their officer was dead. Their flank was collapsing under an enemy force that outnumbered them 20 to 1. In temperatures 40 below zero, with his machine gun frozen solid, he charged the enemy position alone. Armed only with 6 grenades and an entrenching tool, he broke their assault and held the line for 17 hours until reinforcements arrived, saving more than 100 Marines." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap stood slowly, reverently, for his gallantry, the general said, his voice thick with pride, and for risking his life far beyond the call of duty. Sergeant Major Harold Winters was awarded the Medal of Honor. The silence that followed was profound, reverent, almost sacred. Gone was the tension, replaced by the weight of realization. Every person in the tent now saw Harold not as a frail old man, but as a living monument. Tears welled in eyes across the room. Cell phones rose not to record a spectacle, but to capture a legend. Every veteran in the tent stood at attention, their spines straightened in instinctive respect. When General Thorne finally lowered his salute, his expression softened. Harold gave a faint nod in acknowledgement, humble, quiet. Then Thorne turned to Davis. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by an icy stillness. "Corporal Davis," he said quietly, each word a blade. "In 30 years of service, I have never been more ashamed. You wear a uniform that men like this bled for, that men died for. You stand in a tradition built by his sacrifice, and you use it to mock him. You disgrace your rank, your unit, and the very emblem you wear." Davis trembled, unable to meet his eyes. "Gunnery Sergeant Reyes," Thorne called. "Yes, sir." "Thank you for having the integrity and awareness this man clearly lacks. Escort him and his friends to my office. Their time here is finished." As Reyes moved to obey, a calm voice interrupted. "General?" It was Harold. Every head turned. "He's just a boy," Harold said softly. "We were all young once, full of fire, not enough sense. Maybe he doesn't need to be broken. Maybe he just needs to be taught." The general looked from Harold's lined face to Davis's terrified one. Slowly, he nodded. "As you wish, Sergeant Major. He will be taught." Harold's gaze drifted down to the small, tarnished pin on his collar, the object that had sparked it all. A memory flickered. A field hospital. Captain Richards dying on a cot, pressing the bent metal pin into his hand. "Don't let them forget, Winters," he had whispered. "Not what it cost. Not what it means. That pin was never an award. It was a promise, a burden carried across 70 years. A reminder that the truest honors don't shine on uniforms, but live quietly in the heart." Corporal Davis wasn't discharged. Honoring Harold's wish, General Thorne gave him a different sentence, one of understanding. He was reassigned to a one-on-one mentorship with a retired master gunnery sergeant, a battle-worn veteran of Fallujah. For 3 months, Davis's world became history. Days in the base library studying Iwo Jima, Incheon, and Keisan. Evenings cleaning exhibits at the base museum. His final task, to write about 3 Medal of Honor recipients, including Harold Winters. He was learning. 6 months later, on a quiet afternoon at a local VFW hall, Harold sat alone, sipping coffee. The door creaked open. A young man in civilian clothes entered, nervous, uncertain. It was Davis. He stopped at Harold's table, struggling for words. Finally, his voice broke. "Mr. Winters." "Sir, I came to apologize." "What I did? There's no excuse." "I was arrogant." "I was ignorant." "And I'm so sorry." Harold studied him. The arrogance was gone. What stood before him was a man who had learned humility the hard way. "Sit down, son," Harold said gently, motioning to the empty chair. "Tell me what you've learned." Months later, the base instituted a new tradition, the Winters Initiative. Every Marine, from private to colonel, would spend 1 day a month with veterans, listening, learning, remembering. Its purpose was simple: to ensure no one ever again looked at an old man in a polo shirt and failed to see the giant standing before them.